And starting us off tonight, former U.S. Attorney Barbara McQuade and former federal prosecutor Glenn Kirshner. Both are NBC News legal analysts, and I am so excited to have you here on this historic day, actually. And Barbara, I'm going to start with you. Just how serious are the crimes being alleged in this indictment? Can you get real prison time for the things that are alleged?
Absolutely. And as you say, looking at the document itself, it's very hard to characterize this as politically motivated. And, you know, I'm sure that the Trump Organization's lawyers are counting on the fact that many people won't bother to read it. But if you look at it, it's 15 pages, and it documents a 15-year scheme to evade the payment of taxes, concealing payments of in the form of benefits like cars and apartments and private school tuition, bonuses, home improvements. And by doing that, the Trump Organization was able to compensate its employees in a way that they didn't have to pay taxes on these things. And in addition, the Trump Organization was able to evade its own payroll taxes. And so the main charge in this case is grand larceny, because this is a form of stealing property that doesn't belong to the Trump Organization. It may sound more sophisticated and fancier than the way a lot of other people steal money, but at its core, that's what it is, stealing money that doesn't belong to them.
Well, that's a great way to think about it, because a lot of times, Glenn, we look at white-collar crimes and we think somehow they're less serious than other types of crimes that involve theft, for example. What does today's indictment mean for Donald Trump, his organization, his company, his business, the thing that he's most known for, besides being president, is indicted? What does that mean for him?
You know, it means a couple of things. First of all, it means that his organization, for the last 16 years, because this crime was charged from 2005 right up until yesterday, the end date on the crimes in the indictment, June 30th, 2021, it was being run, at least on this financial front, as a corrupt organization, because the indictment lays out how there were two sets of books. That's almost cliche, right? In any mob movie, you have the purportedly official books, and then you have these spreadsheets that were kind of off the record and under the table. And, you know, Barb said this was stealing, and that's exactly what it was. And look at some of the numbers. Over those 16 years, Weisselberg got this, you know, basically fraudulent compensation, or compensation under fraudulent circumstances, to the tune of $1.7 million. I'll tell you, to me, that's real money. And he basically stole $550,000 by not paying taxes in that amount that were due. He stole more than $100,000 from the state of New York and $250,000 from the city of New York. And I love this piece because it tells us who some of the other people might be that are cooperating. The indictment sets out that Alan Weisselberg lied to his own tax preparer and claimed he wasn't a resident of the city of New York to avoid paying $250,000 in taxes. This was a 16-year scheme to defraud. And at least on this financial piece, the Trump Organization was being run in a corrupt manner.
So I have a lot of questions about just how brazen this conduct is and how they thought they would get away with this. I mean, like, I wish I could say I lived in New Jersey, even though I don't, and pay a different amount of taxes. But you get in trouble for that, I thought, Glenn. And so speak to some of the other organization executives, because there were other executives that were referenced in this indictment that may have engaged in the same conduct, where you described them saying, oh, yeah, we don't have, they tried to engage in tax schemes. I'm not even going to try to describe it, but putting that question to you, Glenn.
So, yeah, the indictment details that Alan Weisselberg was also responsible for setting up some of this fraudulent compensation, not only for his own family members, Zerlina, to the tune of $360,000 in tuition that was paid for some Weisselberg family members. It doesn't say exactly who, but the indictment also said Weisselberg orchestrated this same fraudulent financial situation for two Trump employees. We don't know who they are. They're not named. But there's another indication, I think it's on page 14 of the indictment, where there is an unindicted co-conspirator number one. We don't know who that is, and I wouldn't want to speculate about who it is. We do know the controller of the organization, Jeffrey McConney, went into the New York grand jury and testified, which means under the laws of New York, he has immunity. I do not want to suggest that he's the unindicted co-conspirator, but that's one of the other names of a top official that we have heard who has at least testified and provided evidence.
This is also fascinating to me because it gives a little bit of a window, Barbara, into, what people are trying to get away with inside of some of these organizations. I mean, there's always been speculation about the Trump organization maybe not being on the up and up. There are a million anecdotes about how they either lied to contractors about how much they were going to pay them or not paying them at all. Obviously, we know the Trump University case. In terms of just the Trump organization as a whole, what's next for the organization and the criminal case that deals with the organizational piece of this, as opposed to the Donald Trump personal piece of this?
Yes, I think you hit on one of the things, Erlina, about a case like this. I think one of the keys to being able to facilitate crimes like this is the fact that it's a small, privately held company. When you have a large multinational corporation and you have shareholders and you're a publicly traded company, there are all kinds of regulations that you are subject to and all kinds of disclosures that you have to make. When you're privately held, you don't have to show other people the books. And I think that is the way that companies like the Trump Organization are able to avoid detection for some of these kinds of crimes. But in terms of what comes next, Letitia James, the Attorney General of New York, who is a partner with Cy Vance, the Manhattan DA, in this investigation, has said that the investigation is ongoing and is continuing. And we know some of the areas that they have been looking at, because they've said so in public filings and in reporting, are bank fraud and insurance fraud. And that's based on some statements that Michael Cohen has made. He's, of course, President Trump's former lawyer who testified before Congress. And he talked about how the Trump Organization would use this strategy of manipulating the value of assets, sometimes inflating the assets when they were seeking loans, and sometimes deflating the assets when the time came to pay income tax on some of these things. We also know that there has been allegations of others involved in the hush money payments to Stormy Daniels. Michael Cohen went to prison for that. Donald Trump was named as individual one for directing and coordinating that activity. And so all of those things come under the umbrella of the Trump Organization. So I'm sure that Cy Vance and Letitia James and their prosecutors will run down all of those leads to the end. And if there is evidence of a crime, then we will see those in subsequent indictments.
Glenn, can that list of things that the Trump Organization was engaged in can that list be used to create evidence of a pattern? That the Trump Organization, this is how they did business, and they did it in all these different ways. Does that help bolster a case against the organization or, say, Donald Trump personally?
Yeah, there is a very definitive pattern when you have 16 years of double books, right? The purportedly official books, and then the offline books with all this fraudulent compensation to evade taxes. So there is already a pattern that I think we can see, this financial fraud that was deeply entrenched in the Trump Organization. But I think there's another clue that we have, and that's as follows. We just saw Cy Vance impanel a 6-month special grand jury, and we are on the front end of that 6 months right now. If this was the only indictment that DA Vance intended to seek from the grand jury, he could have done it from the regular 4-week New York grand juries that had been sitting, and yet he put a 6-month, or requested the court to put a 6-month special grand jury in place. We're still on the front end, and we just got a consequential indictment. I think that's another clue that not only is the investigation ongoing, but we could very likely see additional superseding indictments.
Hi, I'm Zerlina Maxwell. Thanks for checking out our channel on YouTube. You can see more from Zerlina by clicking any of the videos on this screen, and make sure you subscribe below to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. Thanks for watching.